Hey folks, it's 6:31. Call to order Phoenix City Planning Commission. Monday, April 14th, 2025. And roll call, please.
Okay, Chair Helfrich,
Here.
Commissioner Monso,
Here.
Commissioner Adams is online. Commissioner Luz.
Here.
Commissioner Hanson absent. Commissioner McFadden.
Here.
Commissioner Norption.
Here.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. So at this time, we'll lead in with the pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All righty, well, we have approval of agendas. We have, what, 3 of them? I read that correctly. We have February 24th. We take them one at a time, or should we just roll them all in?
You should take it one at a time.
Okay, let's.
I did want to go there is one correction on the April 14th minute.
Okay.
Business, it says planning commission work session, Chris Green and Kathy. Let's say from Kathy is actually somebody else. So that's where Chris is low back.
That was on.
Page 8 of the packet, edit 6.
I've got March 10th.
Oh, right, April 14th.
I don't have April 14th. We got March 10th.
Yeah, there are only 2 pages.
And
there are
February-
2 pages.
Only 2 that I see. Does anybody see anything?
I've got.
You do?
Mhm.
April?
April 14th,
Okay,
on
let's,
page 8 of the packet.
okay, I went on, I have the online one, so. So let's just start with February 24th. Minutes of that meeting. Looks like we discussed the development code. I think many of us were here. So February 24th, do I hear approval of the minutes? Yes or no?
We have a lot of commissioner comments that were omitted that you've noted, so I'm gonna have it jotted down as we
Okay.
have comments that are omitted, and then we also had a bunch of English changes that needed to be included because we had a robust discussion on one that had everybody on the commission CC. So I wanted to include those also. That's that.
Just for the record, we can approve these with these changes, but yeah,
Do you want me to read the changes?
I can.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Commissioner Luz made the information regarding CPOP. The overage task staff with CPOP on the agenda of the next meeting, so it can be discussed with proper notice. This is done every. Commissioner McFadden expressed this to discuss the meeting on meetings for the planning commissioner, Commissioner
Norton.
Norton has votes.
How do you say it one more time?
It's just Norton.
Norton.
Okay. Requested, I wasn't always maybe
I do too still.
requested training from an outside organization, and Commissioner Adams also expressed an interest in training and moving forward on CPOP. And then the minutes, or excuse me, the email correspondence were for, looks like for March 10th minute meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's hold on that one. Well, good catch. Thank you for, I know that these are not always word for word and what happened. Appreciate you picking that up. Thank you. So with that, would you call it an addendum or whatever? Do we have a motion,
And one more comment,
please?
sometimes after we get changes on the minutes, the public never sees it because it never made it into a packet. So a lot of requests that we publish those in the next packet as approved minutes.
They're published online.
Also online, but for me, I listen to packets like through the on the past, so when we have any commission meetings, so we send the packets online.
So when the minutes are, we'll make the changes to include these in the minutes.
Yes.
See,
Right.
draft minutes. And then once these changes are added to the minutes, if they're approved, chair will sign them and the reporter will scan it into the system and she'll post them online so they'll be available for everybody to see.
Although we thought it would happen.
No, they never would. It's not the way that those changes are done. It is made on the draft minutes.
Yeah.
And then final minutes are the ones that get uploaded online.
Okay,
Okay.
to me, that, I just don't see belaboring this anymore myself personally, but I see your point. I respect your point, but it's it's a meeting that was in the past, and I think we covered things that we talked about that are now in, if somebody wants to go through the record and look.
Just to be clear, the corrected minutes will be published online.
Correct.
It's just not going to be in the agenda packet.
It won't be in the packet.
So it's just we have the minutes, we go online and look at meeting minutes that are there. So what agenda was on the packet won't be accurate, the one that is in.
Right, and the minutes for this meeting will reflect that their routine is that, so.
Okay. I prefer usually, but let go.
Well, it's quick and easy and it covers everything that we should be doing under stature, I would say. I mean, it's
It's pretty standard operating.
But, yeah,
It's gonna be
plus-
covered in these.
plus it's all been recorded. So I think we're covered. So roll call, please. Well, just on, we're talking,
Make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
correct.
Second.
Thank you. On February 24th is all we're talking. Okay. Roll call, please.
Okay, Commissioner Norpchin,
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe's,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams. I can return to that.
Yes,
Oh, gotcha, loud and clear. Thank you. Commissioner Monso,
Yeah.
Commissioner Helfrich,
Yes.
and Commissioner McFadden. Motion passes.
All righty. So let's move on to March 10th.
But to those, I think that the emails might be suited for that. Those minutes, I'm not quite sure because it was this in between. So we have the requests for these to be agendized, and then we have them not on the agenda, and you have no expressions of the minutes. So the emails were about those conversations, responding to both the agenda for March 10th and responding to the minutes, asking for corrections to minutes. And so since we were having all of the discussions, so I'm not sure if those are ratified to the 10th or to the 24th.
Okay, so my recommendation would be to apply them to 10 and not make changes to the minutes and add these as an attachment.
For March 10th.
All right.
I'm not sure if this is, I don't have this written up, and I'm not sure if this is, if this all will be fair, good for the next staff or direction, but the way that the discussion around the CPAW was related isn't quite the way that I remember it happening. So I listened to it again, and it doesn't seem to really reflect the chair bringing out the concern about the fact that we could potentially out of forward with public meeting law because we didn't have it on the agenda. And I think the way in it reads a little differently. And the suggestion was made, I think, staff that we go ahead and do it out of order.
So What we've been doing with minutes since the year report started, and which is fine with, what meeting law is. Really, you're gonna start seeing the sections of minutes, and you're gonna see video starting here, that's gonna hold feelings. Unless there's a motion made, because the video is the official document of the meeting. So if there's something in here that's stated versus what the video question. But what I would say is if it's not stated in here, and one of the more detailed conversation, moving away from that and just leaving the video with the timestamps on there. So we can provide those discussions. Let me add that in.
Is everybody clear on this?
If you wanted to make a motion on March 10th meeting, adding these things to just that about, and I would make a motion to approve the March 10th minutes with attached emails. And then if you have subsequent changes. So I was not really clear to talk about what's not right. March 10th minutes.
Yeah, it's the very opening statement, very first opening statement where it talks about how we were gonna be able to discuss the law.
Gotcha. So what we could do there is we could, we just leave it, we could leave it blank, figure it out. And it just has a good time. And before you have the recommended language.
I
State
know,
that.
I know, I was busy with our book, so I didn't get as far as we. But I just made that was specifically the invite. Do you have?
No, think about what we should do.
I mean, honestly, without going back to listening to it myself, I can't rephrase it, maybe it's off and do it later. Or I think it is on subsection 3, if there's no conversation there, it will just be that that's when that section started, and we can see that there was a 11-minute conversation.
Yeah. There was, so, yeah, I think in particular, I think it's helpful for the chair's concern to be noted. The chair had concern that without this being on, thank you, that the chair had concern without this being on the agenda, that there was concern for public meeting law. So I just kind of would like to give him credit for recognizing that. And because that's my recollection is he did recognize that. So I wanted to give him the credit for that.
Sure, we can add that, and I'll just, I'll make a note on here before, that we put to listen to this as part of the meetings of the chief executives. Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's especially high points like that were very definite. They need to be in there. So I guess I'd say let's pass on the 10 and let's bring it back for review again.
Okay.
Is my suggestion. All righty, so now we're on to, I don't have it on my deal, my April, what was it, 10?
April 14th.
Was it April 14th? Excuse me, I don't. So. Well, April 14th, we have. Amendment there that Commissioner McFadden's going to be added to it. Can we hear those?
That was for the March 10th meeting.
I don't have anything for the April 14th meeting.
Okay.
I had one amendment.
You have,
Yeah.
okay,
Just to clarify that we had a representative from OTAC.
okay, gotcha, that changed, okay, perfect, all right, very good. So we can easily add that, does everybody agree? Can we vote on this and have a motion, please?
I'll move that we approve the April 14 minutes with changes noted.
Second.
Okay, motion by Liz and second by, I'm gonna try this more.
Norton.
Okay, roll call, please.
Commissioner Liz,
Yes.
Commissioner Norpchin,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams,
Yes.
Gotcha. Commissioner Monso,
Yeah.
Commissioner Hanson is absent, Commissioner Helfrich,
Yes.
and Commissioner McFadden.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All righty. Wow. So, back to where I need to be. So, public comments, do we have anybody's on, standby online with public comments?
Looks like maybe one, sir. Mr. K.
Well, Mr. K, Mr. Paul K, so, a person, wanting to, present information or raise an issue not on the agenda, each person shall be limited to 3 minutes, may not allocate their time to others. Presiding officer, we need your name and address, if you could state that. And I think that covers everything that we need to know, so.
He's promoted and can speak.
Okay, yes, Mr. Paul K, please.
This is Paul K, 4495 South Pacific Highway, Phoenix. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. At the previous meeting on April 14th, I believe Commissioner Luss was asking about the traffic count on Bear Creek Greenway. I would like to give you the information from 2016 from the counter that is in Blue Heron Park is no longer functioning. The year-round daily average of pedestrians is 81, 63 southbound, 37 northbound. The year-round daily average of cyclists, 178, 50 southbound, 50 northbound. Doesn't quite add up. But the point is, we have a means of collecting valuable information. It would take some maintenance to get that counter working again. And I'd love to see it done. It breaks down, as I already said, northbound, southbound, bicycle, pedestrian. It's valuable information for those wanting to have businesses along the Greenway. You know what time to start serving coffee and what time to stop selling beer, as it were. And we can look for changes in the traffic counts to measure the success of our economic development initiatives based on Greenway for transportation.
Question, so who maintained that, or how is that set up to begin with? I didn't know it was there, and it's good to know that we had such a thing, and appreciate your information and data.
Very welcome. Jackson County Parks
Okay,
has set up a half a dozen along the Greenway. I believe
Okay.
2 are presently functioning. It's called EcoVisio, EcoVisio, in particular Eco Counter, or maybe it's the other way around.
that's good to know. Thank you, Paul.
You're very welcome. I'll say goodbye for now unless
Yeah,
there's any other
it's
questions.
You're right, because we were asking for benchmarks, and that would definitely be one, so.
Yeah,
okay.
that was 2016.
2016, so it's probably even a lot more than today. Yeah, that's been quite a while back. Yeah.
That's my belief. We
Yeah.
don't have data.
We don't have current data, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, again, bless your heart. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.
All righty. Is that all we have?
Yes, sir.
All righty. So we have new business, planning work session. Mr. Moody.
They don't have anything to do with this.
So. I don't see a public hearing on here for,
It's on number 7.
okay,
It's new business, but public hearing has its own line item in the agenda.
I apologize.
We can go right to number
No,
7.
I'm sorry, I pulled up I got the wrong date on my.
That's okay. We got you.
So here we go. Yeah, excuse me. Okay, so yeah, it's, new business public hearing, land development code, DC 25-01. Presentation by Mr. Moody.
All right, I'm going to present over here because it's easier to see you all and I can spread all this stuff out. So
Perfect. Opening statement.
yes, sir. Going forward, I think what we're going to do is have the vice chair read this statement. Give Commissioner Nortman some opportunity to have some duties as a vice chair. But for now, not to put her on the spot, I'm going to go ahead and read it today so that you're aware of what it is that we're doing.
No
So-
pressure, you know.
So during a public hearing, So during the public hearing, there's a specific order that we follow for orders of the hearing. One of them is to read a statement to educate people on how to participate in the public hearing and what it's about. So this keeps people on track, gives everybody the same information at every public hearing. So I've been reading that just because it's just been easier for me to do that. So I'm going to do it tonight, and then we'll meet at some point and we'll go over the process for next time. We're going to have a few of these going forward. So the City of Phoenix Planning Commission has the authority to hold legislative hearings in accordance with Oregon public meeting laws as described in ORS 192-610 through 192-710. Our decision on legislative issues is advisory to the City Council, who make the final decision to approve, modify, or deny. The planning manager has determined that the approval criteria that apply to the following application or issues before the Planning Commission are as follows. In this particular application, the city's comprehensive plan and the Oregon statewide planning goals, along with chapter 4.7, I believe. Oh, good guess. 4.7, the land use district maps and text amendments. Those are all what apply to this particular decision today, very broad. Evidence and testimony in the hearing must be directed towards these criteria or other criteria in the city's land development code and comprehensive plan or other applicable land use and development related regulations that a person believes apply to this decision. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient clarity and detail to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond accordingly to the issue precludes appeal to the Oregon Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Before the end of the hearing, any participant may request a continuance. In addition, whether or not there is a continuance, a participant may request that the record of the proceedings remain open for at least 7 days after the hearing. The Planning Commission will consider whether or not they will continue the hearing or leave the record open for a specified length of time for new written testimony or evidence. If you plan to speak tonight, when called to speak, please come to the microphone or raise your hand in Zoom and state your name and residential address for the public record when you're called on. Please direct your comments to the applicable criteria as identified by staff, and the following time limits are allotted for public testimony. In this case, where the applicant is 10 minutes, individuals have 5 minutes. Individuals representing a group have 10 minutes, and generally staff or the applicant will have rebuttal time at the end. If this were quasi-judicial, that's probably the case it would be. After listening to the testimony and considering evidence, the Planning Commission may vote to recommend approval approval with conditions, or denial of the application unless the matter is continued or tabled to another date time specific. If you have any questions or do not understand the procedures, you can raise your hand on Zoom now, the audience. And so hearing none, I think we have some seasoned participants in the audience, so I think we're probably good to go.
All righty, so this is a quadricial. How do you say this? Quadricial?
This is legislative.
Okay, it's not, it's legislative, not quadricial. Quadricial. Yeah, any commissioners have spoken with the applicant or anything about the application proposal. Commissioners must state the relationship and either disclose full details or any ex parte contacts or anything else that recuses them, so if necessary.
And in this
Hearing
particular
none.
situation, because it's legislative and you're all appointed by the council, there is no ex parte contact in this particular one. Again, that would be the case if you had a quasi judicial application and an applicant sitting here. If there was an applicant sitting here to do a zone change that was legislative, then yes, then these standards would apply. But this is a city application, so we're good.
Okay, so at this time, staff report from the planner.
Yes, sir. Thank you. If you could open up that presentation. So in front of you, you have a packet of information. I hesitated printing it all out because I'm going to show it to you here on the screen mostly anyway. But in case there was further discussion after this or the hearing was continued for some reason or additional questions, I wanted you to be able to follow along. I understand that the text is kind of small, but I did reference in this particular slideshow page numbers to page numbers that are in line with the packets that you have. So when we go through this, if there's a question, we'll be able to refer quickly back to a page number. My goal here today is to talk about, this is file DC 2501. So we did the work session last week, our last meeting, which unfortunately you all didn't have the information. So I was able to meet with a few commissioners, answer a few questions, which I've incorporated those into the slideshow, except for Commissioner McFadden's today. I didn't get a chance to do that. So, but I will raise those questions. So today I want to talk about it's a little bit different. Normally on a quasi judicial application, we just talk about the findings, really, what makes this application approvable. But this has a little history, and I want to make sure everybody has the history of what we've been doing, the purpose and the objectives, the project phases that we worked through. This has been a very long project. Community engagement, as you'll see, Mr. K is here and was a CAC member, has shared a lot of good information. And then finally, the recommendations from OTAC and DLCD and the working group on the types of language that we want to see going forward. Hopefully this is legible on your screen. It seems to be a little pixelated here. So on the purpose and objectives, really, there were 5 main objectives, and these were outlined in the final report that you received, but really to engage the communities along Highway 99 and the Bear Creek Greenway, really to find a planning process that works to bring those customers that Mr. K was talking about off the Greenway up into the city. Maybe make a better connection between the Greenway and the Highway 99 corridor, whether that's a direct connection through business sites or whether that's just pulling people off the path to the businesses that are directly adjacent to that. Another objective was to create a plan that developed code language for redeveloping lands adjacent to the transportation corridor that supports all kinds of transportation or multimodal transportation, particularly walking and biking, and improving destinations accessibility to reduce the need for motor vehicle travel. That is not our goal. I mean, it is our goal in our transportation system plan, but it is a state goal too, which we'll talk about here as well. To strengthen the capability of local government to effectively manage growth and comply with the Oregon Transportation Planning Rules. These are administrative rules that all cities are required to meet with their transportation system plans, or when a zone change happens, zone changes must align with the transportation planning rule. And of late, there have been a lot of new OARs that require specific transportation related measures be taken when code amendments are done, zone changes are done, to be in compliance with state law. Also to integrate transportation and land use planning. We didn't talk about the actual transportation networks as much as we talked about them just being adjacent to the individual uses, but to encourage transportation efficiency that supports multimodal transportation. We have a lot of areas where we are growing our transportation network, the actual infrastructure, but also have an opportunity to take advantage of a relatively clean slate in an undeveloped urban area. And so we need to, as things develop, take as many opportunities as possible to create these connections to the Greenway and to provide opportunities for people to get from one destination to the other through our city. To develop, lastly on there, to develop code language that supports efficient use of resources, encouraging full utilization of urban services, just mixed use buildings, increased transportation options, and creating developments that are more human scale so people feel comfortable, they feel safe. And Commissioner McFadden and I talked a lot about that today and what makes this appropriate for an area of development and why really why all the landscaping requirements and the vertical elements along the highway. And this is one to bring it more to human scale so people feel comfortable walking in the corridor. Project phases. The project consisted of two principal parts. One was visioning and strategic planning, and the other was the creation of a final report and recommended policies. I would say, with the exception of Commissioner Monceau and Commissioner Helfrich, the latter is probably more important to the newer commissioners. Although the information from the work that was done, I did put online for you to have an opportunity to review and kind of familiarize yourself with the purpose of the project. The project started approximately November of 2022. So it's been a long haul with some pauses. Some changes of staff, changes of consultants. So there's a lot of information around here. And so glad to see that we're getting to the end here. So under visioning and strategic planning, the purpose was to identify multimodal transportation opportunities, to recognize opportunities and challenges of developing post-fire landscapes, to evaluate increased housing opportunities, and to develop elements, including green infrastructure and various types of multimodal transportation. And we'll talk more about what those could be if you're not familiar with those as we move through the presentation. Lastly, the final report and recommendations. Recommendations to increase safety, visibility, and connectedness to the Bear Creek Greenway was discussed. A comprehensive plan and development code amendments. You'll see in the matrix that you have that there are a variety of changes that we're not addressing today. Those are changes recommended for the comprehensive plan, which we will probably get to those when we make some other amendments coming up in the next few months, I would imagine. And then lastly, analysis to support the recommendations based on the transportation planning rule. And really most importantly for us now, the climate friendly and equitable cities rules that we are going to be mandated to address in a fairly short order. When we get to 5,000 people, we have to be compliant with that, and we're a couple hundred people shy of that. So at the end of the day, these code amendments, we asked DLCD and OTAC to really identify in your matrix which ones of these recommended changes denotes compliance with the CFEC rules. So if you see an asterisk by the code amendment, that is a recommended change that's CFEC compliant. In other words, work that we won't have to necessarily do when we do our climate friendly area code amendments, which will come up soon. Community engagement. Transportation is one of those things that's really hard to get people to participate. Park master plan was really easy. We had 400 surveys, and everybody was excited to talk about what was going to be at their new park. Not so much with transportation. All of our public outreach, we had good information, but we didn't have a lot of people, no matter what we did to publicize it. So we did establish a community engagement plan, and followed that as well as we could. We did include stakeholders and partners, a CAC, a PAC, so a citizen advisory committee or a community advisory committee, a project action committee, I think is what we call that, and the project management team. Those three groups really drove the public comments, the agency comments, and then as project management team, staff and the consultants. There were various engagement activities, one which we did at the high school, maybe about a year and a half ago, where we had poster boards of different types of multimodal transportation options and things of that nature. That's where we had about maybe 9 or 10 people there, mostly not from here. But this was a project that early on in its stage was partnered with Talent, Phoenix and Jackson County. So we were trying to share resources and get as many people there as possible. So communication tools, we had a website specifically for this. There were online surveys and other social media tags for this. We did just about everything we could to make people interested in transportation. The public involvement plan also included the roles and responsibilities of individual groups and then the project schedule. So just really quick on the community engagement, the goals were to inform, educate, consult, ensure that the community members understood how the decisions were being made and how their concerns could be heard, and to reach a diversity of stakeholders. Didn't read very well. A group of stakeholders and community members that was a diverse group. Let's put it that way. That reflects the greater community along Highway 99. And I think we were pretty successful with that. As I noted, Paul was one of the people that participated, but most people that participated were, they had something to do with the highway corridor and had some buy-in to the project. Stakeholders and partners, just generally speaking, schools and youth. We use the Phoenix Talent School District a lot, parks and nature. The Parks and Recreation Committee was pinged a few times early on to see what information they could provide. Industry and businesses, Phoenix Industrial Studios and the Chamber, Public Safety, Fire District 5, and the Phoenix Police Department for us here in Phoenix. Natural Resources, Jackson Soil and Water Conservation District, and the Rogue River Watershed Council. They had some comments early on. Residents and property owners, of course, ODOT being part of this project, and then service nonprofits. And I'm going to skip that one. That was pretty community engagement heavy, but I was trying to prove a point. There was a lot of attempted community engagement, and for what it was worth, I think we got a lot of good comments out of the folks that did participate. So recommendations is the next section that we're going to talk about. And so these were derived from two different sources, and this may have been confusing. And I know at least one question was raised as to, well, we have these different sets of amendments. We have this matrix, and then we have these other attachments. And at first, it didn't make sense what the question was. And then after Commissioner Norchman and I met, it made perfect sense that we were actually incorporating code amendments from our previous code audit that was done in 2023 in with these as specific to the changes that were being made to really support the changes that were being made. So in my big goal of trying to hold off on major policy changes and work through the code amendments that we had been working on, these got introduced into this process as well, which after reading it works out great. But I think that there was a little bit of confusion there. So I just wanted to make the group known that, you know, the amendments that you have today in front of you reflect really what you had last week, except for there were a couple of changes based on public comments that were received that we wanted to get in front of you before the meeting, because there were comments that we had erred in a couple of places, and we had missed a couple of things that were brought from the CAC that we wanted to include. So that's the two sources, that and then of course the work that was done by TGM. Recommendations developed to meet state housing and transportation planning rules. These recommendations are specifically meant to meet the TPR for Oregon and the climate friendly and equitable cities rules. Again, it wasn't the purpose of the project, but when we can address code changes that meet those standards and don't raise any objections now, we should be moving forward on those and getting those changes done sooner rather than later. It will make our job easier when we start doing the larger CFAG amendment. Let's see. So this seems like a repeat slide. Sorry about that. So the summary of recommendations. In your matrix, you have comprehensive plan, proposed amendments. Those were to the land use element, to the economic element, the city center element, the housing element, and to the transportation element. And I'm not going to read all of those sections there, but there were some things that were identified that will help us remove some challenges, if you will, to development, things that will help support our zoning code amendments in the future. When we look to do comprehensive plan amendments, we will definitely look to incorporate these based upon the work that was done by the TGM group. But for now, we're just looking at zoning code or the land development code recommendations, which I've broken down here. And I'm going to go through them individually, but I'm not going to go through line by line of the text because I assume that most have read. But what I want to do because with the document that you have in front of you is just introduce a couple of what I believe are pretty light changes to the code, just so that you have those in front of you. So if there is a motion today to recommend approval, you can recommend approval with the conditions or with the changes that you all have in front of you. So I'm going to try to get through these fairly briefly to leave time for questions, but if you can just jot down your question if you have one. I'd like to just get through because I think we probably answer most of the questions, but then we can circle back if we need to. So does that work for the commission?
Does for me.
Okay. So the first section, chapter 1.3, these were to adopt recommendations from the 2023 code audit. These definitions directly impact the changes that are being made or recommended throughout the rest of the code. So these, you've already seen these. We talked about them for a meeting and a half. There's not a lot of change, although there were some recommended additions that I'll get to here in just a minute, but they were rather simple, if you will, but were necessary. Excuse me. Chapter 2.2, residential districts. This was to adopt permitted uses, a new permitted use table, and then recommendations for some architectural standards. Chapter 2.3 was the city center district. And the purpose of that amendment was to adopt a new permitted use table as well. Again, you're going to see these as the first three in every one of these chapters. What we have in our zoning code now is a text version of the allowed uses. And then we have a two table setup. And then we have the commercial setup, which is much better, but none of them work together and none of them are consistent with one another. So one of the recommendations that came out of the original code audit was to create that permitted use table that was easier to read for people. Check the box if the use is allowed and you see that it's a permitted use or a conditional use, and so that's what a majority of those changes are, with the addition of some new uses. And then to adopt recommendations for open space requirements, architectural standards, and pedestrian and transit amenities. It's probably the biggest section that was amended, and it seems like there was a lot of changes, but there was a lot of deletions too. And I think it was really to consolidate more, to say what we wanted to do differently, but then remove the duplicate language. And then chapter 2.4 is a commercial highway district. Same type of changes, same general sections. So we'll talk about that briefly here in a second. Chapter 3.2 discusses really vehicular and access circulations, and that was to adopt some recommendations from this code audit. Chapter 3.3, very heavy on landscaping and trees for new areas in general. And then there were some questions that were raised about that, which I'll get to at the end of the presentation, about really how strict some of the landscaping requirements are and whether or not they should be directed towards both the city center district and the highway district. And then vehicle and bicycle parking. And then chapter 4.2. Chapter 4.2 really came from the code amendments. And this is really, we've had quite the messy way of determining whether or not a type 1 or a type 2 site plan is required. And now that we don't have parking minimums as proposed, it makes it difficult to base your decision of review on only the parking standards and how many parking spaces you might have. So we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and what those changes were. But that's going to get us to a place where the decision-making process is clear and objective to help people out. So chapter 1.3, moving quickly through here. We don't have too many more to go. So thanks for your patience. So on pages 1 through 18, this is where we discuss the definitions. Again, the definitions did not change from your original review, probably a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago. We dove heavily into the definitions and spent an enormous amount of time making sure that they were good. And I think we ended up really just falling back on the definitions that we had in our draft that we had sent to you. So nothing outrageous there, but just to really be in line with what it is that we're trying to do. Chapter 2.2, again, the use table. I'm not going to go through that specifically, but I do need to get to that. Give me 1 second. I'm a very visual person and I don't want to rip you off on things that you should know about it. So. All right, so table 2.2. You can see there's just a lot of on the single family housing. We don't call it single family housing anymore. It's single unit housing. These are just more definitions that are more aligned with state regulations. Manufactured home parks, now manufactured dwelling parks, just to raise a few. So this is really what table 2.2's changes was to bring consistency with the definition section and also to common uses across land use ordinances. And then you'll see on page 22, we just deleted the old table, which was really difficult to use. There were a lot of ORS references removed in this chapter. Most of those ORS references, they change. And so we wanted to make sure that those references were removed or corrected. And then lastly, in that section on page 28 of the packet, this has been a common issue that Jeff and I have been dealing with all the multifamily apartments that we've been building is it 80 feet or is it 150 feet of length that you can't exceed? And 80 feet is not much for an apartment complex, but 150 feet is definitely a long span to have no changes in the articulation of the building. So if it's 150 feet, there's other references in the code where it says 150 feet and there were some conflicts. So we went with the larger of the length. If you have an 80-foot building, you probably already have some architectural elements to it. This was kind of just a discretionary change based upon which one do you use. And it seems like most most of the apartment complexes that we've done have been close to the 150 foot range. And I think this one actually, let me just double check here, so I exceed. Yeah, so this one is a not to exceed one. So I think the other language we have is if you have, you know, if you're building wall length as such, you have to have the articulation. So you can't build an apartment complex as the code currently is written that's 81 feet long, right? But we have articulation criteria that says if it's 150 feet, you have to do X, Y, and Z. So we just wanted to bring some consistency to it. It was a really long explanation for a really easy change, but those were the types of things in chapter 2 that we were really looking at. Chapter 2.3, same thing with the table. I'm not going to go through it, although there are some changes that I'll get to because I have them at the end of the slideshow. So I want to get through the actual amendments and then some revisions to the amendments. So beginning on page 49 of your packet, we talk in section 2.3.5 about open space, and that information was really elaborated on and moved to a more complete section in the landscaping code. 49. So you'll see on page 49 that in section 2.3.8, 2.3.5. So 2.3.5 and 2.3.8, we had some changes, and really the 2.3.8 is where we start talking about the changes as it relates to streetscapes, which include the setbacks and frontage requirements, streetscape amenities, building entrances, primary building entrances, site design, including fencing, mechanical equipment, building design, residential uses on ground floor, and design of large scale building developments, building articulation. So there's a lot to cover in that section. It's not all new. Some of it was removed from the section that starts on page 53. So again, this is where you'll see a lot of deletions and a lot of additions. But there were some things to make it more cohesive. Chapter 2.3.9, beginning on page 49 as well. That's the pedestrian and transient amenities. So those were all moved to the previous section that we just talked about. Okay. Chapter 2.4, really the same thing. I'm not going to belabor this. That this is the question that came up is, are the landscaping requirements that we apply to the city center district, are they, should they be applicable to the commercial highway zone? Do we want the downtown zone and the commercial highway zone to have the same landscaping requirements? And I would say generally, no, but there are a lot of mays and shoulds. There are only a few shalls. So when we start talking about landscaping, plant landscaping versus hardscape landscaping, there are options. It doesn't mean that you have to do all of those things. So the intent of the code amendments were simply just to get the vertical elements and the pedestrian scale amenities to the street. Not that they are going to be required all the time. They still have the ability to landscape between the street and the building, or have the parking lot, the commercial highway zone, have some separation from the street. So I read through this really, I took what you said and was trying to poke holes in it just to see if I thought that it was going to put us in a position where we were making it too difficult to develop in those commercial highway zones, and then whether or not we were trying to make it too pedestrian oriented in an area that's all vehicular. The priority is really the vehicles in those areas. So I'm comfortable with the language that was proposed. I don't see a need to change it. I thought initially that maybe changing it to the first quarter of mile of the highway district outside of the city center district would be a good way of doing that. But then the code wasn't really written to address the other stretch of highway. So I believe that it will suit us well. I think it's going to get us to a point where we have a nice looking streetscape on Highway 99 without a lot of extra burden on development. So
Good
with,
question.
what's that?
No, it was a good question.
Yes, I like those questions in advance too.
Yeah, I mean, really, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So chapter 3.2, access and circulation. Section 3.2.1I amended to reduce the maximum block length from 800 to 600 feet and from a perimeter of 1,800 feet to 1,400 feet, really just to make the block length smaller. I mean, at the end of the day, we wanted the blocks to be a little bit smaller as a means of getting people to walk in those areas. Now, will we see the fruits of that? Probably not. Maybe in PH5, as we develop PH5 and start developing blocks over there, we might, but we don't have a lot of area for a lot of new subdivisions or new road networks. So it's not super likely, although we did recently use this particular block length standard to determine whether or not an affordable housing project needed an extension road into an urban, an unincorporated urban area. So it does come up, and shorter is probably better in this case to reduce the maximum. Section 3.2I also amended the block length standards for highway commercially zoned property east of the highway and west of Interstate 5. So it just adjusted those based on whether or not you were on the east side or the west side of I-5. Chapter 3.3, beginning on page 87. So I did ask this question. We did strike the requirements for a certain percentage of site landscaping in the commercial, the city center district. And I may ask Chris to provide some explanation from OTAC on this as well, but I think I'm going to try to shoot with his response here. We have a number of landscaping and plaza standards that we're introducing into the code. Sometimes it's going to be impossible to landscape 10% of your block or your property if you're building from property line to property line with no setbacks. So to put a percentage on that would be difficult and make a lot of properties possibly undevelopable if you couldn't meet the landscaping standards. So that is why we're recommending to pull that out. 10% is a really small number. So if there were concerns that you might not see any landscaping, we can go back and look at that again.
When the city has streetscape proposals done, they should add some amenities or some greening or some trees.
Right.
It should all, I think of like Jacksonville or Stafford.
Right.
Building the building, we're going to 10% landscaping.
Right.
It's not going to be there. But when we start working on streetscape, the city, that should help green things.
We can do that. And then also the pedestrian amenities requirements, I think will get us to a point where there might be hardscapes there, but those hardscapes might also have landscaping in them as well. So it's not your typical, landscape your Walmart parking lot type thing versus, where you have like you mentioned the streetscapes in Ashland, where you may have big concrete flower pots that provide separation from traffic to buildings, and those have some landscaping in them. I think that's really what this gets us better to, and gives us an opportunity not to be so restrictive on those building structures. We did introduce some special landscaping standards along Highway 99. really to prioritize walkability, pedestrian friendly landscaping. So we talk about front yard landscaping, where landscaping must be incorporated within any front yard setback to enhance the pedestrian experience. So to bring that pedestrian scale to the street. We talk about pedestrian pathways and plaza features where front yard setbacks exist. At least 20% of the landscape area should be incorporated into a pedestrian friendly feature, such as small plaza, seating areas, or landscaped hardscaped areas. Special features can provide direct access to building entrances and be shaded by nearby trees and canopies. So pedestrian pathways and then other hardscape elements as well. Really with a focus on visibility to storefronts. Landscaping on Highway 99 is not intended to hide the building as much as it is to support it, really. Trees on Highway 99 frontage are prioritized to thrive in environments with broad canopies for shade while maintaining clear lines of sight. Large parking lot standards on page 90. This is where we get into some of the state mandates where we've been applying this standard since the state told us we needed to. And we had originally put something very similar to this into a planning commission recommendation a year and a half or so ago. That made it through planning commission recommendation, and then we held it until we waited to see whether or not the legalities of it were going to hold. I don't know what the response to that is at this point, but we've just decided to adopt it, or recommend adopting it. Seeing how we've been doing it, it has not been an issue for the most part. But the large parking lot standards are meant to deal with parking lots over 1/4 of an acre. There's specific tree canopy requirements. There's island placement requirements, driveway landscaping, tree canopy planting, tree planting standards, care standards, and maintenance of trees. There's also buffering and screening of parking areas that are required. Those will be important as we build larger parking lots, which again, I don't see where this impacts Phoenix as much, maybe in PH5, but probably not as much in our downtown area. There's not 1/4 of an acre lot here for a building, let alone a parking lot. So let's see. Let me get my space back here. So chapter 3.4, vehicle and bicycle parking, beginning on page 95. These are just another extension of not mandating parking. So there's some areas where we can mandate parking and some that we can't. This change in table 7, 3.4.3 reflects what we're allowed to do. Chapter 3.4.3 on page 98. Another requirement that we are to initiate, and this is for parking lots as well, EV charging stations, as well as parking lot designs for pedestrian circulation. Those are very specific requirements drawn down by the state for the cities to adopt. Last but not least, on the forthcoming amendments here, chapter 4.2, and I'm going to just do this very briefly. We have two types of site plan reviews. We have a design review, which is our type 1 review, which is ministerial, which is just done by staff pretty much over the counter. And we have a type 2 review, which applies some sort of discretion and requires staff to send notice out, requires staff to possibly make a decision with some sort of discretion applied. What chapter 4.2 does in its amended proposed stage is really says when is something exempt from design review or from site plan review, excuse me. And if it's not exempt, what is it? Is it a minor review? Is it a major review? If it's a minor review, it's called it's a type 1 review. If it's a major review, it's a type 2 review. And then there's a table on page 104 that guides some of those changes. There are also application submission requirements, and this is be one that I'll come back to with the planning commission because I need a recommendation from the planning commission. I have a recommendation for the language here beginning on page 105. 105 subsection A has the general submission requirements, site plan information, and then it says an application shall include the following information. Option 1 to require the same information as a type 2 review, so requiring the same thing to be submitted for a type 1 and type 2 review. Option 2 requires a simplified information such as a site plan drawing showing existing conditions in the proposed uses, architectural drawings including building elevations with envelopes if architectural work is proposed. Or option 3, a shorter list of site plan review elements. The applicant shall include a site development plan drawn to scale with the following appropriate information. The staff's recommendation here is to go with option number 3, because if these things don't exist, then they don't have to provide them to us. But I want to make sure that when somebody submits the site plan, that we have all of the information we need to render a decision, whether it's a standards-based application or whether it's a discretionary application. So my recommendation would be to adopt option 3 as the submission requirements for site plan review. And then lastly, just a reorganization and reaffirmation that we have a lighting plan requirement. That's on page 108.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Just reconfirming that we have a lighting plan.
That's
standard.
That was gonna be my question. So 3.12 is that point, is the lighting?
Yes, 3.12 is outdoor lighting. And this refers back to that and requires to show the location type and height of outdoor lighting in addition to what's required in chapter 3.12. It's already in our code. This is not a change. It's just underlined and bolded right now to and moved to be clear that it's required. Also required traffic analysis if required by section 3.5.2A5. This is just a little repetitiveness, making sure that folks understand if there's a traffic impact traffic impacts that they may have to address or submit a traffic impact analysis subject to chapter 3.5.2. There are some other changes on there too, but they're pretty much just in line with trying to organize the code. Chapter 4.2.8 talks about development permit or development in accordance with permits approval. So the modification section has always been a challenge for us because people want to come in and modify a site plan that already exists and use the modification standards. This clears that problem up. So if somebody has a site that's built and they want to modify their site, they're either doing a type 1 or a type 2 site plan review. If somebody has a modification to a plan that was approved but not built and they want to modify it, that's where the modification comes in. So this language clears that up a little bit. And we also clear up the expiration and the extension requirements, just a tad bit. So that's all of the proposed amendments. I do really want to quickly go to some revisions that were made in the packet that you have. So the same packet we were just going through. You saw some blue text in there. The blue text was changes that were made on Friday based on public comment that we received. And I want to just go through those really quickly. Chapter 1.3, we added a definition.
What
artisanal
page?
Page 2. Artisanal manufacturing. There was a definition there. It said light manufacturing of equipment, bakery, furniture, and similar goods. we added the underlined section there, 5,000 square feet or less. When conducted entirely within an enclosed building. In conjunction with on-site commercial use. So it was just an expansion of the definition to be more clear that what that particular type of use was. We also added a definition for live work unit. And that was in its entirety. That begins on page 10 of the definitions. Chapter 2.2, 2.2.8 architectural standards. We added section C5 prohibiting chain link fences and requiring 50% transparency of fences. This was specifically in residential districts and along the way. That's on page 30 of the packet. This was to allow security along the greenway, but not to block it off. Not to block off the view from what we're trying to do. We don't want it to separate what people are doing on the greenway versus what they're doing on their private property. So if somebody has a fence, it will have to meet certain standards along the greenway. And that's on page 30.
Between the residential and the greenway.
And yeah, and commercial. Yeah, I mean, we'll get to it on the commercial districts as well.
Okay.
But generally across the board, we wanted to have some standard in there. You can see the blue text subsection 5 and 6. Talking about fences and then screening along the greenway, necessary to allow the openness of what we're trying to attain on the greenway there. Chapter 2.3, table 3.2 adds the live work use as permitted. That's on page 44.
Question.
Yeah.
Just go back on that. I'm thinking over by Coleman.
Yes.
There's the homes there that are along that park, and there's solid wood fences. So that would not be allowed under this. It would have to be the 50% with wrought iron split rail design.
Let me get back to that.
It's just for the greenway.
It's just, no, I understand. It's just, I'm just making sure I understand.
These
I guess
are-
I'm thinking I would be concerned if I lived on a public place to have a 50% open fence. That would be a major, it doesn't seem like enough privacy if that was me.
Yeah. So it wasn't intended for single family residential. It was
Okay.
intended for the architecture as part of the architectural standards for site plan review.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong, Chris can make a note and come back to that. And looking at where it's located, this really is talking about attached dwellings, multifamily dwellings. If you look at the particular section that it's in.
Okay.
I mean, it is in chapter 2.2, which is the residential zone. But this is talking more about, if you go back to page 27.
When you're doing page references, are you doing the pages that are actually printed? Or are you doing the ones in your presentation, the page number according to the?
What's in front of you. So I sent you the electronic link. So the document that I sent you to open up on your laptop is the same one.
I know this is the one he printed out. Okay.
We get it.
Yeah.
So Chair, question.
Yes.
So in reading the blue area pertaining to the greenway fences, I was trying to envision where something like that would apply in regards to safety. Because like Sarah mentioned, when I live by Culver Park, and when we were rebuilding the fencing, one of our big concerns was safety. So we have an 8-foot fence along the railroad, because some people hang out the railroad, worry about them climbing the fence. We had people actually coming from the railroad and living in homes that were being built. So with the greenway, are you saying that someone like in an apartment complex down back of where if you're going down here to the right, the apartment complex right on the greenway, are you saying that an apartment complex couldn't build a regular fence? They have to build a fence that you can see through, or isn't as safety oriented as other fencing?
Correct.
I don't know if
That's
And can you explain, that's for aesthetics? Is that right? Can you just explain the?
Yeah, so it's an architectural standard. So again, if this is meant for, and Chris, you can chime in if I'm wrong here, but this is not for single family development. So if you have an apartment complex along the Greenway, this is where this would apply. I understand what you're saying, that you still don't necessarily like that standard for, for that particular use, but to your question, if you have a residential house and, I don't know where you would have a residential house on the Greenway in Phoenix that wasn't non-conforming, that wouldn't be redeveloped to some commercial use in the future anyway. So these are intended to apply to the uses that are subject to architectural review standards, which are not single family homes in the subdivision.
There's a mobile home park on the Greenway that has a chain link fence. They have a gate with a code, and it's only for residents to go out on the Greenway for safety purposes.
Right.
So are you saying that couldn't happen anymore? If a mobile home park were to build a low income housing development or whatever it is along the Greenway that's residential, they couldn't have a fence that was appropriate for safety purposes, because what you're asking for is people that might live there to be able to see the Greenway.
Right, but that's what this is recommending, but it's not just that. It could be wrought iron or split rail design. But keep in mind that chain link fences on the Greenway are pretty much not required, not allowed anyway, because they're almost all in the floodplain. So you can't have a chain link fence in the floodplain without doing a no-rise certification.
Well, let's think about chain link and use whatever kind of fencing it is that's there for safety purposes. But it seems to me like the fences that are being recommended in blue, the changes that are Friday, that would be less safe than some other type of fencing. And many times the fencing that's put there is for safety purposes, not for aesthetic purposes.
Right.
And the Greenway is, I used to talk to people that live in Phoenix a lot, and people coming off the Greenway and climbing over their fence or coming up the yard or into the shed was a major problem. But is that what you're saying, that the fences can't be safety oriented? They gotta be 50% visible or visibility. Tell me how that would look. And
yeah, I'm not saying that they can't be safety oriented, because a wrought iron fence can be totally safe if it has, your 3-inch gaps, right?
yeah, boy,
And it's not any different than, in my opinion, than somebody having a wooden fence on the Greenway, not being able to see what's on the other side of it, and somebody still being able to jump over your 6-foot wood fence. So I don't have a preference one way or the other.
Yeah.
This was recommended through the CAC process as far as making things visible, commercial properties visible from the Greenway, and probably vice versa, so that you can see from your property to the Greenway and make sure that you don't have camping going on. You don't have, some nefarious activity that you don't want.
Can we take a moment here? Chris Green has a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thanks. So Chris Green with OTAC. Probably sort of reiterating the last part of that conversation, I guess, that part of the idea of that more transparent fencing along the corridor was that safety orientation of, more visibility out to the Greenway and what's happening adjacent to people's properties. Similar to like in front yards, that's one of the main reasons why front yard fences are generally shorter is, there is an aesthetic purpose to it, but it's also a safety thing so that you don't have, view obstructed areas around the entrance to buildings or front windows, things like that. So this is sort of looking at it as if that's like a street, and sort of like a, similar to a front yard in some ways of like an apartment complex or commercial building, as opposed to just the backyard.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Any other thoughts or concerns? I'm curious here.
Yeah, let's have a more, let's take a moment, take
Yeah,
a
for a second.
discussion of this. Does anybody have any other input that we
I mean, on that topic in particular, you had asked us to hold questions till later, so I do have a couple of them that
I think on this
noted,
item,
but
I'd
at
like
this
to.
point
I'd
on
like
the
to
fence,
discuss it now.
personally, I don't feel like safety and aesthetics are mutually exclusive. I feel like there's a lot of great options for safety that will allow this, that this code allows, and I think it can allow us to be able to do both of them. So I'm okay with the suggested language.
Yeah, the clarification.
No, it's, no sec. Settle. We have anything to add? No. No. Chris, anything else to add?
So it's a different fence code for the Greenway versus the rest of Phoenix.
And what are we talking about here? Go ahead, Chris.
So this basically takes the fencing requirements that apply in, similar to what's in front yards in a lot of parts of Phoenix, but specifically the Highway 99 frontage, and then applies parts of that to areas along the Greenway. So this is in the residential part of the code because the other fencing requirements are in commercial zones, and so there is areas where there's R3 zoning, that higher density residential zoning along the Greenway.
All righty, thank you.
Okay,
let's-
so we can come back to that, of course, if you have, questions, and when you guys are deliberating too, if we get to that point, you guys can have that conversation.
Absolutely.
So chapter 2.4, page 61. And I promise we're almost. Let's see. Oh, that was the easy one. We added live work as a permitted use to the table. Chapter 2.4.3, which is on page 67. Removes light manufacturing development requirements, which are already covered in chapter 2.4.5. So just removing some duplicate information there. So that was a proposed revision since the packet went out. Chapter 3.3 landscaping, section 3.3.3. New landscaping, add special landscape standards along the Bear Creek Greenway, page 81 of your packet. Might have that page reference wrong. 3.3. Oh, page 90. Let's try page 90. I knew there was going to be one where I forgot to renumber it after I did pages. Page 90 talks about special landscaping standards along the Bear Creek Greenway. To provide connectivity, visibility, and natural and open space preservation along the Greenway. Especially tree requirements and low shrubs should be selected for their ability to enhance the visual interest without blocking pedestrian pathways. Native and drought tolerant species are encouraged. Question came up is why shouldn't that just be the case altogether for landscaping? And my recommendation is that should be the case. We should be, fostering the planting of native and drought tolerant plants when we can, not requiring it, but encouraging it, and not just in this section. So I had a recommendation in the landscaping section to just simply put, I don't know which section it was here. Hold on. Bear with me 1 second. Sorry. Well, find an appropriate place to encourage that, and it probably is in the front section and the applicability. is just to add, if the commission is okay, and generally speaking to the landscaping plan or landscaping requirement, to generally encourage native and drought tolerant plants. If the commission is fine with that, I will find the appropriate place to put that in there just to make sure that it's not just specific to the Bear Creek Greenway. I guess that was the point being made, is that if we're going to encourage native and drought tolerant plants, why not throughout the city? Why just on the Greenway? Anybody have any heartburn with that? It's not requiring, it's just encouraging people to look more towards native plants and drought tolerant plants than to, plants that are arborvitae.
I always love encouraging versus mandating.
Yes, it is not requiring.
Okay.
Okay. Ta-da. We got through it.
Question from Commissioner.
Okay, so a couple of quick questions. Is there a reason that the LCD, the Land Development Code, cannot require or encourage on-site stormwater treatment for new facilities and parking lots? And the answer is we do have something in our zoning code, but we actually, our VSS is the city's phase 2 permit holder for stormwater management. And so we defer all the stormwater management to Rogue Valley Sewer through an intergovernmental agreement, where they and we as a city chime in on what that design manual should look like and changes to those manuals. But we don't have the qualified engineers on staff to do that work. So that work is deferred to Rogue Valley Sewer Service. And generally speaking, we require that a stormwater development plan is approved and provided to the city prior to issuance of any permits. On the front end of that, we require that they provide an engineer's letter saying that stormwater is feasible on the site. It's going to be feasible in 99% of the opportunities that are going to present to themselves, but there's that 1% where somebody wants to build on the entire parcel and they have retention requirements that can't be covered up by a building. So anyways, that was the answer to that question. Is there a reason that the preference for native versus drought tolerant plants are limited to shrubs? Again, we just answered that. So I think just being general about trying to encourage native plant development would be, or native plant planting should be good. A few sections require.
Can I jump in? Is it okay to jump in on that one?
Sure.
So when it comes to that, can you also add the fire resilience? I mean, it may sound like it's a little bit much, but some of our native plants are actually pretty prone to fires. So we might want to add in there, native plants and maybe a fire resilient plants in there, because we are going to be maybe looking at that language later and I'd hate to have to go back and revise it.
Sure. I don't see an issue with that. Again, we're not mandating it.
Exactly.
At this point.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Maybe we could put a picture of what not to plant, right?
Yeah.
Okay. A few sections require streetscape amenities such as bus shelters. Are there any parts of the land development code that specify the minimum spacing of these shelters and what would prevent too many of them? And at the end of the day, Rogue Valley Transit District really is the one that selects where these are going to go. They install them. They pay for the construction of them. They work with property owners to do it. We do get their comments on planning applications. So if there is a need for one, it will be considered by them. And then they work it out with the property owner. Any bus shelters that we get are going to be owned by RVTD. We're not going to be putting our own up, and they're very stingy with where they go. So for good reason. Is it the intent of the CC and CH districts to have the same development standards? Kind of answered this going through. The intent is not to have them have the exact same standards, but there is flexibility in both zones to allow creativity for the landscape design. And hopefully in the more auto-centric areas, people will take a different approach and not, maybe they'll have a plaza out front, but maybe they'll be designed in a way that it's usable against traffic. Could hardscape plaza design standards be refined to ensure that the hardscape is aesthetically pleasing? No. However, the intent is to create more walkable areas in general. Many of the hardscape plaza standards are recommendations that can be added. I don't know why I came out and said no. But they are recommendations that can be added. I don't think that we're gonna end up with a bunch of, especially the highway commercial zone, it still has a landscape requirement, so a percentage requirement, so. Apologize for that last one. That wasn't intended to be like, no, you can't.
It's correct.
That was the end of the day in the last slide, right? And that was today before I left. So, okay. So, I am finished. I think we can go around and ask questions if there are some.
Open public hearing?
I have.
Yes, she can ask questions of staff first.
Okay,
And then we can open the public hearing, because maybe those questions get answered. Is how it generally works. You're not deliberating, you're just,
Correct.
she's asking questions. and
Okay.
then We go to deliberation after the public hearing.
so commissioners, do we have questions, please?
So when you were talking about 3.3 landscaping and you mentioned the 10% requirement, that we were removing that 10% requirement. Just wanted to talk about that a little bit more, make sure I'm understanding what you're talking about, because to me, one of my sensitivities is when we put housing in commercial zones, I'm conscious that I want it to be quality housing for folks who live there and that they don't just get built in a concrete jungle per se, especially when you have families or kids, and we do have requirements for green spaces within a certain proximity to each of the developments. But for me, it did seem, if I understood you right, just having the 10% requirement, they could just get a variance from it. And then that would give the commission an opportunity to look at it on a case by case basis, right?
Well, we generally don't want to write code that we want people to be taking variances too, right? And I think this is our time, unless I'm not understanding the question. This is our time to make sure that we have it the way we want to, so that we're not asking people to take variances in the planning commission to have to consider those. I think if we, and maybe Chris might be able to do a better job explaining, this is pretty new to me. And I think he's been writing this for a lot longer than I've been reading it. So I'd really like to hear his take on how these streetscape standards apply to developments in the city center zone that are applicable to, or that are mixed use or housing related. So if it's okay to ask him that question.
Yeah, and I think I would just add that it just seems to me that 10% requirement for landscaping is not massive, but it seems like it's in alignment with the vision and the goals of the project. So I would just be curious about why we would want to remove it altogether instead of keeping it. And then if somebody did have a rare occasion where they were lot line to lot line, then they could just make a request. But in general, we would have more aesthetically kind of pleasing landscaping.
Chris, do you have response to that?
Yeah, and I guess I'd start by saying this is probably one I'm in making that recommendation a little more on the fence on, or was ambivalent about this one. It was sort of a I think I can definitely understand the importance of having that, piece of greenery, especially on residential properties. The main idea was that it's that there are other requirements, either through some of the pedestrian amenities that are required, which can include landscaping, things like if there is stormwater requirements. There's just different ways of getting roughly 10%, green space onto a site. And so one of the things in the kind of the earlier stages of the project that was identified is that there were a lot of these, especially landscaping for residential development, where there were sort of overlapping standards. And so when you added it all up practically on a site, it didn't always work practically. So the idea with this in the CC zone is that there are a lot of smaller parcels there. The idea is more of a, this is probably one of those CC versus CH, places where they part ways a little bit. There is this idea of smaller buildings, but maybe, built to the street, potentially built to the sidelines of the property. And And in doing that, if there's a 10% landscaping requirement, that isn't, triggered or kind of, if there isn't landscaping that's already there as a result of these other requirements, is that a situation where somebody, doesn't kind of like leave space over to the side of their building just to put the 10% landscaping in, or puts it at the back of the building where it doesn't really do as much good, or it's just kind of like one kind of a hurdle, for those smaller sites, I guess.
So we could leave just looking at the zoning, looking at the proposed amendments that are on page 50, which are specific to the CC zone, we could leave the 10% in there, and then it just becomes a more restrictive of the two. Again, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you have to landscape 1,000 square feet, you're putting some stormwater someplace, whether it's a landscape bed, or a rain garden, something like that. Some of the hardscape features, you can have a certain percentage of hardscape features, but there are also, I was just looking through, starting on page 41, the streetscape amenities, street tree requirements where they can be, pedestrian lighting where they can be, understanding that, in the built environment, it's tough to do that. But in addition to the amenities required in subsection A, you have to provide one at least of the following streetscape amenities, which is a pedestrian plaza or courtyard, extra wide sidewalks, seating areas, canopies, awnings, overhangs, transit amenities, things that would also have landscaping in them. So maybe they can get some landscaping credit for some of the landscape that they're putting in those areas as well. So I don't, as Chris said, this is not one that has to be removed. I think that if it is a challenge, I don't like the idea of people requesting variances for it necessarily. I'd rather make sure that we just account for it somehow.
What's the setback for city center? So they're 0 to 10 feet.
0 to 10 feet, yeah. So a maximum of 10 feet. So you can only set back 10 feet, but the 10 feet you could set back if you wanted to provide, if you wanted to use the plaza seating area, if you will, as a street amenity.
So if you have a mixed use building, you have a residential at the top, commercial on the bottom, and you're a builder and you want to have 0 setback. So you're, it looks much like Ashland or Jacksonville. So you don't want a setback and you're right at the street. Then you can't have any greenery or you can't have any landscaping in the front because you're right at the sidewalk.
Right.
So isn't that a conflict in the city center for people that want to build with 0 setback and have it be multi-use?
Well, I think that you still have these requirements, right? So you still have to put them someplace. You still have to have a pedestrian plaza, courtyard, or extra wide sidewalk somewhere. You still have to have a seating area or one of these, a pedestrian plaza or a seating area or a canopy or a transit amenity. These are things that you have to have. So you have to choose one of those. So even if it's not on the front of the building, it might be on the back of the building.
Well, I'm more specific about don't you think landscaping can be a pedestrian plaza or a place where they sit? We're not talking about trees, grass.
Well, you do have the street tree requirement just above that. So development must provide the following streetscape amenities. So you have to provide street trees in accordance with 3.4. And I'll have to look, and maybe Chris can chime in as to what happens if you can't do that, if you're building, two. In the case of our main street, we don't have Park Row in every adjacent sidewalk. So we can't make people put street trees in where there's not street trees available without losing parking, right? We can't make them come in and put a Park Row into the parking strips to plant trees. So,
but the commissioner, like that point, she's talking about not having a concrete jungle,
right,
just wanting some green space, especially with residential development in the city center, particularly. And I'm just saying, if I just still again envisioning what Ashland looks like when you're walking down the street in Ashland, there's no grass between the sidewalk and building, same thing with Jacksonville.
Right.
So I think what we're envisioning here is where our buildings are right up against the street and people are walking back and forth. And we've also talked about mixed use or encouraging it where we have residential as well as commercial space in the same building. And when I see zero setback, if I want to build a building that's zero setback, how do I accommodate 10% mandate to have landscaping? How would that work if there's a building right next to over here and over here? How do I do
I
that?
think that's on a site by site. I think this is a site by site thing though, and I think we're trying to, you know, just say in general, what we can do is the best of our knowledge with the current, you know, available space. So we're looking at a new build coming in.
Yeah.
So a new build's going to have some determination on where they would go and how they would put things and how they choose to design, whether it is a courtyard and back. And again, if it is residential, then I think it is ideal for residents to have a place, whether it's in the back or the side or the front. Even if it's a little like a bench, you know.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like it's prohibitive, based off of
So you-
what I'm hearing. It's something that's just, it could go either way. There's a potential that maybe somebody may have an issue at some point in time, where they wouldn't be able to create the space when they're building from scratch, but we're not talking about retrofitting spaces either. So we are talking about new builds, right?
New builds, correct.
So they do have flexibility in design. And I feel like if this is there, we have a better chance of giving both, whether it's residents or business folks or the aesthetics of people walking by, the benefit of the landscaping. And then if there is a major conflict where we run into a problem with parking and sewer and something, there are options for them to be able to seek, whether it's a variance or something else. I believe there are options, if I'm not mistaken, in the process for that to be addressed.
So you're saying landscaping could be in the back of the building as opposed to the front of the building?
But this, according to my understanding of the 10% is that it
Yeah, the
could be
10%
anywhere.
could be anywhere on the lot. But I guess my question, Chris, back to you. And thinking about this from the commissioner's perspective here. So if we require 10%, where in chapter 3.3 do we address the general landscaping standards for the city center zone? Because in the city center zone, if you look at the city center zone and get to chapter 2.2, sorry, I gotta get back there. Or 2.3, sorry. There's not really a mandate to landscape the area as much as it is to create these plaza areas or these streetscape amenities. It's street trees, decorative pedestrian lighting, and, you know, plazas or canopies or things of that nature. There's no, unless I'm missing it, in that particular section, there is no discussion of what landscaping requirements there might be. And if that was because we removed the 10%, it might be something we need to think about putting back in.
Yeah, you mean in the proposed, yeah, like the standards to use that.
We should definitely have another standard under streetscape amenities, or, I mean, we have the streetscape section, but in the city center district, we've removed the actual landscaping requirements. I believe.
Percentage coverage, and then there was I think an open space requirement.
Right. And that open space requirement is no longer there, right? It's been
Yes,
removed.
it's been removed.
Can you have a requirement that says you have to have 10% landscape in city center just for residential? You have to have at least 3 units, I guess, in city center to build. Can you have that where it's 10% for residential development, which is 3 units or more in city center? And for commercial, you don't need to have the landscaping requirement.
Yeah, you could definitely, where we struck it out there, you could put it back in there and say residential only. Or for mixed use residential, that's required.
I think that hits on your,
It hits the most sensitive part for me, but in general, I feel like when we're looking at, and I'm looking at the intention of the project, we're looking at tree lined streets and streetscaping and different things like that and pedestrian friendly. I still feel like landscaping creates a better feel in our community
Right.
when it's available. So
so you-
I'm a fan of it. If it's in there as is, we're removing it. So I'm saying let's keep it as is instead of changing that.
So you
So it's already there.
you want landscaping, not just for residential, you mentioned earlier, you want it for commercial.
Yes, as it was before, right? Which is
Right.
my understanding. So it's already there. I'm just suggesting maybe we don't take that away. Because
And to
yeah.
Commissioner's point, most excuse me, most of these new builds, they will just have to design it in. And to some extent, putting on my stormwater management cap, there's going to be some retention requirement that has to be open to landscaping anyway. All the retention has to be open to landscaping, so you might be able to get you 10% from the detention area.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's some flexibility in the ways that it can be counted too, right? So it's
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure with, and Chris, maybe you can point us back, if there's a 10%, if we leave the 10% requirement in there. And we want to see green, we want to see natural landscaping, a mixture of natural landscaping and hardscape. Is there something to point back to that says, okay, if you have 10%, you need to go to chapter 3.3, here's your landscaping, and then here's the minimum vegetated landscape you have to have versus the hardscape.
Yes, let's see. I know that there is. I'm just like looking at it right now. Yeah, so there's like material standards, 3.3.3D. And actually C has that 10% requirement as well, that one.
That's on page 90.
It's on page 116 in our packet.
3.3.
3.3.3D. Landscape materials. Point 3.3D.
D. Right, I just wondering if there was. Okay. Bark, dust, aggregate, non-other ground covers may be used to cover no more than 20% of the area to get landscape. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that wasn't removed somewhere along the line. So I think we're good if we just leave that.
What was the rationale for deleting it in the first place?
Chris, you want to explain that one?
Yeah, so I mean, basically the idea is if there is a place that's meeting their streetscape requirements, meeting their stormwater and landscaping it, or doing all these other kinds of things, but they can't find 10%, of the site, or there's not a good place to put 10% landscaping on a small infill site in the CC zone, then it prevents that from sort of being the kind of what breaks that project, or causes somebody to put in like a landscape setback just for the purpose of meeting the 10% rather than kind of being more consistent with that. And I think Ashland or Jacksonville example that you mentioned of kind of the zero setback. And then I would say even like differentiating it for residential, potentially it could discourage people then from including housing in a mixed use development if it's a very small site. But again,
I think that what you see in Ashland and Jacksonville on there where it's zero is old buildings that have been there for quite a while. It's nothing new. Because I think they're new. They do have landscaping involved. Where the old ones, yeah, zero, no landscape.
Well,
And I think on your new ones, no, it's I mean, you can see it just recently, just here in town, right here at the second building down past the Foodry. They got a small landscape out front, and that's a new build, of course, but and I don't think I think it looks good. I don't think it's asking too much. I agree. I think they should have it. I think it should be in there. Old buildings, nothing you do, they're already there. That's what you see in Ashland and Jacksonville. I think that you're referring to, but new build, no. They don't. They in new build, they have, I'd say at least 5 to 10%.
But I was gonna say, and it just may be that they can't get the zero setback to meet the landscaping standards. If they can't put their landscaping standard, landscaping someplace else, then and the only place they can put it is in the front, then they need to set their building back in order to accommodate that.
Exactly.
So I think that's kind of you can have the zero setback if you have a big enough lot and you're gonna landscape the rest of it. But if you don't, then are we achieving what we're trying to achieve? Not really, because we're still allowing a zero setback. But I think that's a conversation that most downtown zones allow a zero setback right to the street. So I think just by removing it and getting back to where we were at and removing the strike through that and seeing 3.3.3D just reading it again and knowing that it's still there. I think we're good there.
It's okay. Okay. I would like that personally.
We can talk about it during.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
That was a question, so we can talk that question later. Any other questions from planners?
I had one other one. And this is just when you talk about the permits and the permit review and permit 1 versus 2. Could you just clarify where's that line between which ones come between the commission and which ones get worked in-house?
Well, they're all worked in-house, but one is noticed and one is not.
Okay.
Right. So one's a ministerial, the type 1 is a ministerial decision that comes in that is very clear and objective as just standards, right? It's a commercial building that has, let's say, no on-site parking and meets all the setbacks and meets all the landscaping, right? We're checking the boxes. There's no discretion being applied. That's the type 1 review. The type 2 review would be when you get into the standards talking about articulation where should be this or should be that. I don't have an example right off the top of my head, but those are more discretionary decisions that require the noticing of the application. So while the type 1 is intended to be quick, it is probably not over the counter, as I probably said. It's intended to be very quick, though, provided all the information is there. Does that answer the question?
A little bit, and this is again probably because I'm a new commissioner. So this is then with the type 2s. Do those come before the commission?
No.
So, may I?
Type 2 does not, you're saying?
No, type 3 are the only ones that come to planning.
Only. So what's the difference between type 2 and type 3 then?
So type 3 is going to be your typical conditional use permit, to be a variance. The idea behind these.
The commission.
Yes.
Comes up to us.
Yes, the idea behind these and the idea behind the state is to remove the barriers for development. And that's to get relatively clear and objective standards that can be administratively approved. It doesn't mean that it can't ever come to the planning commission. They may want to raise it to the planning commission, which nobody really ever does, but they have the opportunity to, and it can come to the commission on appeal if the neighbors or adjacent folks don't like it. That's where that's where the public hearing side of it comes. So if we make a decision on a type two review and the applicant doesn't like it or the neighbors don't like it, then their appeal body is you as the planning commission.
Okay, and is that pretty standard? I'm imagining those are pretty standard throughout from city to city.
It's getting more and more. I mean, again, the push for the state is to remove discretionary standards from housing or economic development, specifically housing, but some economic development as well, to remove the barriers, which include discretionary standards, which can cause undue delay or potentially make property owners or potential buyers feel like they're being burdened with something. You know, can't purchase a piece of property without knowing what's clearly required. And so that's why you're seeing more moves to the type 2 reviews that are administrative. But again, understanding that they're all still subject to appeal. So if somebody feels like staff erred or they feel like, you know, one of the criteria wasn't met, they can elevate it to the planning commission for a hearing.
That makes sense. So it's public notice on 2, but it's not necessarily seen before the commission.
Correct.
Okay, that was the distinction that.
Yeah, and type
I was a little
ones,
confused
type
about.
ones don't get noticed.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
thanks for the patience for folks who knew that already.
Good question.
You asked us earlier about type 1 minor review, type 2 major review, and us, we should select option 3, site plan review. You're talking about doing that at a future meeting or tonight?
No, I'm talking about incorporating it tonight.
Appropriate tonight.
Yeah, so those are just the standards of what's required to be submitted. It's the full gauntlet of what's required, and I'd rather ask for more upfront and tell them we don't need it if it's not applicable than say we only need a site map and that's all they submit and we get nothing else.
So as part of the approval process tonight, you want us to add something to the to what you've given us in regards to site, site 2, option 3.
Yeah, we'd strike out option 1 and option 2 and use option 3's language.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So if you get to the point of making the recommendation for approval, then it'll be as amended that here, and then whatever other changes you have, including choosing option 3, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners?
I have page 103.
103.
Yes, 4.2.2, part 8, part 1. Kind of wondering if you could maybe provide a scenario or two about the type of land uses. Because if I'm reading this correctly, change in occupancy for one type of land use to a different land use resulting in no increased traffic or development would be exempt.
Correct.
So I guess that feels really broad to me, that to have a potential land use change that would be exempt to planning review.
So
Let me get my head around that.
there's not going to be a lot. So what it would be, for example, a veterinary hospital versus a general office space. Those are two different uses, but they probably don't generate, they probably don't have a various change in traffic. So we would want to just say, okay, you're really trading office for this other smaller, inconsequential use. So you don't need to do the site plan review. You're not doing any site improvements. You're going in and occupying the building. And it really is a change of occupancy by the building permit. So that's one example. Another example would be a fast food restaurant, let's say a higher volume fast food restaurant with a dine-in restaurant. They're both restaurants, and the use that's currently there generates more traffic than the use that's going to go there. So it's going to be less impactful, and that would be not require a design review. And that's pretty much how it is now. I mean, a design review is anything that's 14 parking spaces or less requires design review. This is just saving those people that are just doing tenant improvements to have a different use coming in, from having to go through the site design review and addressing all the landscaping requirements and things like that. There's a nexus for what's being overly burdensome as far as, if you make them do design review for a tenant improvement and their landscaping is not up to par, we may have to make them do all kinds of landscaping in order to meet the design standards. And that can be overburdensome is not the word I'm looking for.
I guess I'm thinking like maybe the overall traffic doesn't increase, but the hours change significantly. And all of a sudden, the place that was quiet is really loud in the morning or really loud at night. Or it's brighter, or maybe there's, I don't know, some sort of odor coming up. And if that goes as exempt and didn't get noticed, then
Yeah,
would the neighbors like have any opportunity to chime in and say this is, even though it doesn't compatible with the way that they're currently using it?
so again, we're talking about, if you're talking about changes that create odors or light pollution or might be noisy or generate a lot more traffic, those are probably going to fall in the conditional use criteria. So in the table of uses, you'll probably see a C.
Okay.
And if that's the case and what's there now doesn't require a conditional use permit, then they'll have to do it.
Okay.
So they'd have to go through the process. This again is more intended for, the bank, changing tenants to a small office space.
Okay.
We can't use discretion to make that decision, so we have to have some quantitative measure. And so, one of them is the increase in traffic volume, and you can assume that a bank's gonna, draw more traffic than maybe an office does. So that's how we would determine whether or not that's exempt or not. I would say 9 times out of 10, most of them aren't going to be exempt. But this is I think more for the cases where we run into where there are some minor tenant occupancies, and it's a question about whether or not we should make them do design review or not. This kind of answers that question for us.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yes. It's good. Anybody else? It'd sure be nice to open the public hearing and move on.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I appreciate the questions, and I just hope, if we need to, I didn't say this before, but if we need to continue this for more discussion, we can. But I'd prefer to get the public comments and have your deliberation. Possibly.
So, moving along here, then let's open up the public hearing for following testimony. Citizens that are testifying in support of the application. Do we have any? Yes, Mr. K. Or no, I'm sorry, Mrs. Adams. Wendy?
No, it's Paul.
Always can.
Is it Paul? Paul, you raised, did you
Yeah.
raise?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misread it. Paul? Yes.
I'm I'm in favor of the application. I have some areas I'd like to suggest some revision. In some cases, it's policy. In some cases, there are contradictions. Shall I say that now, or do you want to get a bigger picture of other commenters?
The floor is yours.
Okay. In section 3.2, access and circulation, where there's a requirement for Bear Creek Greenway connections via private property, I would invite you to consider making that voluntary and incentivize it, such as an alternative to a shared driveway stub. That gets people out of their cars and walking, which is the point of a lot of this. And I think Phoenix Industrial Studios has demonstrated without qualification that it's a great opportunity, and I think people will like to do it, but I think requiring it, well, I've already said it, I'd like to see that voluntary. And when pathways to Bear Creek are proposed, Fire District 5 should have an opportunity to review the materials and the width so it can support emergency access in both directions. That's one. The trash enclosures, location and screening. Location beside buildings, that's a little ambiguous. Sometimes it's better to locate it away from all the buildings um, for access and circulation. It seems like it could create a constraint and perhaps a smell issue and a fly issue. Also, the trash enclosure screen should be able to be see-through for the safety of the users. I think that having a decorative cover is a good idea, but you should be able to see through it so that you're not surprised by somebody lurking in there. Moving on to rooftop mechanical equipment, shall be set back or screened to not be visible from somebody at ground level 60 feet from the building, is going to collide with the Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code, which requires type section 802.5, type L and type B vents must be 2 feet higher than any part of the building within 10 feet. Another technical problem, there's the code require 40% of ground floor facade of non-residential use to be transparent windows or glass doors to create visibility and interaction. Good idea. However, the Oregon Structural Specialty Code, Chapter 16, um, uh, um, limits the amount of open area. And incidentally, the 40% isn't specified linear footage or square footage of area. And then the Oregon Energy Efficiency Specialty Code 5.5 prescriptive building envelope compliance, fenestration is a 40% max of exterior wall area. Then moving on to EV charging stations, a requirement for fast chargers, a level 3. Level 3 chargers, the people who use those are coming off of Highway 5. They spend a little bit of time and they're on their way. Level 3 chargers mean you got to bring in a higher voltage, 480 3-phase, I believe. And level 3 chargers must be tied to a network for communication for money exchange. I'd like to recommend changing that to level 2 chargers. That would serve the local clientele, the regional clientele, and the occupants of projects, of the local workers, so they could charge their vehicle while they're having a meal or while they're at their desks. And level 2 chargers, you have the option of joining a network or not. It depends if you charge for it. So it gives more flexibility, and I think that it is more in line with the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Act, even though the state's mandating the level 3. I think the level 2 actually does a better job of meeting the goal. And then one more. At the previous meeting, there was a question of anybody advocating for the natural inhabitants of Bear Creek Greenway. And my recommendation is to use an imperfect but simple to administer solution would be to require new development adjacent to Bear Creek Greenway District to adhere to Bear Creek Greenway District standards for abutting parcels along the abutting length and extending into the parcel depth of 100 feet, subject to a maximum of 50% of the parcel's depth and with a minimum depth of 50. And the purpose is Bear Creek Greenway is used by people for purposes of recreation, non-motorized transportation, potentially supporting economic relationships of Greenway users, adjacent land uses. Bear Creek Greenway also includes Bear Creek and a pertinent riparian habitat with natural functions, wild inhabitants, and ecological relationships, which may be negatively impacted by adjacent human-centered uses. Nature's advocacy is by human proxy. Accordingly, human-centered uses should be protective of nature's needs. However, land development codes in some cases are segregated by land use district, and human impacts to adjacent natural areas are in part mitigated by altruism, biophilia, and current conditions of low-density development. As land use density and intensity are anticipated to increase, land use code should more adequately regulate human impacts to adjacent natural areas, inhabitants, and rhythms. Parking should be set back and buffered by vegetation. Impacts from lighting and non-greenway land uses need to be specifically addressed. Electronic changeable video message signs, video boards, and lighted box signs should not be placed along the greenway. That's it.
All right, Mr. K, thank you for your input.
You're very welcome. And I want to say thank you to the commissioners for getting through this, and thank you to Mr. Wilcox and Mr. Moody for our discussion all along. It's been very helpful and very supportive of public participation. I appreciate it. And I think it makes a better plan.
All righty. So any other citizens want to testify in support of the application? Do we have anybody else? If not, then citizens that are neutral or testify against the application. If none heard, applicant response to a rebuttal of the testimony and evidence.
I'll be brief. I appreciate all Mr. K's comments. I think a lot of what he's proposing can be addressed at the time of site development plan review. And if somebody wants to make the argument that specifically to the building code issues, that the land development code is out of compliance with that. Most of what's coming from here is from the model code from the state of Oregon. So I can assure or at least trust that it's been vetted to not be conflicting with the building code. But with that said, if somebody wants to submit an application and can't meet those standards for some reason, they certainly can demonstrate that burden of proof is on them when they submit their application to determine that a code can't be met. So I think, again, all of the things that were mentioned by Mr. K, I think we're good. I think that there are, again, there's some responsibility of the applicant to demonstrate that these things aren't going to work. And we can't solve every single problem. We will unintentionally make problems in our code by doing what we're doing now. And we're going to only realize those when the first applications come in. So it's not perfect, but I think we're at a place where we've taken a lot of public input and including Mr. K's original input, which I think we've incorporated much of that. So I appreciate the response, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if there's any more.
Is there any questions from, well, I guess we need to close the public hearing first. So at this time, we'll close the public hearing and open it up for commissioner discussion. Questions? Comments?
Of the recommendations that Mr. K just made, these are not reflected in the amended, the red line draft that we saw. Is that correct?
No, correct.
Okay.
These were in addition to.
In order to be able to make accommodations, we would need to pause, not vote on this today or not vote on those sections. Is that right? And then have new language suggested?
Correct. You can, if you feel the need to review those, I'll have to, of course, transcribe it a bit, I'm sure. If you feel the need to modify the code to address any of those particular requests, then yes. You trying to think of the process here, because you opened the public hearing, you could reopen you'd have to reopen the public hearing to do so, to take that information so that the public could respond accordingly. Not impossible, but you would need to reopen the hearing, and then we'd have to continue it. We just have to stop and continue it to a date time specific, and then with some direction to bring back some or all of those recommendations would need some guidance.
Any other comments, questions from commissioners?
So Commissioner McFadden, are you proposing that we look at Paul's comments in more detail and?
I was merely inquiring about the process of what would happen and making sure that these were new and that they weren't already in the language that we were possibly voting on here in just a little bit.
Of all of the comments that we've received, I did not recall hearing any of those in the previous comments.
What I did hear Mr. K say is that he supports the application.
With modifications.
In what you were, and what I understood, and I'm trying to gather all this up, but basically you said that everything that's in there addresses those in a certain way, if at least not specifically not pinpointing, but generalizing.
No, I guess what I was saying is that I didn't process all of it and can't come up with a response for every single one of those. But what I can say without a doubt is that the applicant, when they submit an application for a particular site design review, if something is not addressed as it was raised by building code, or somebody doesn't want their trash enclosure where it's required, they can demonstrate that, one, our code is not in compliance with state law, and that's their burden to submit with their application.
Okay.
And, if they can't meet a specific design requirement, they can write a finding as to how it's not and how it shouldn't apply. They have every right to do that.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
There's no way I could process all of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, it's like, totally. It's going to be at time of application, then it'd be reviewed at that time. All the specific things he was saying, unless somebody heard something different.
Well, I just wanted to kind of point of clarification for something like, as Paul suggested, the see-through enclosure or moving the trash. Maybe there's no reason they can't comply, but it would be preferable.
Correct.
To take another option.
Mm-hmm. That's
Is as written, does that provide that flexibility? I mean, what you just said was they need the burden of proof to show that they can't. But what if it's more of a?
So if it's a trash enclosure issue, it's a good example. It's there because we don't want to see the trash.
Right.
And so the flip side of that is that you don't want it to be, totally obscured so you can't see what's behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's an argument to both sides, but it's aesthetics mostly.
Sure.
Because you can lock the trash container, right? I guess not that somebody couldn't jump over it, but the idea is that there's some level of aesthetics, and like I said, I'm not saying that we need to have trash enclosures right next to the building either. I'd have to go back and look at that one again and see. I don't really know right off the top of my head whether, I'd have to put it up against a plan and just see. If it is a problem, we will be doing more code amendments. We're going to be doing a few more at the very least. And so, That's why
Okay.
you can adopt it. And then, like I said, there's nothing that's going to be perfect about a code.
That's right.
And we will inevitably make decisions where we wish we hadn't done that and we can go back and fix it. I have a good example when in a different jurisdiction wrote a tree code and, it didn't work. And we realized it didn't work and, it needs to be amended. So
So it's a big document. And I just hate to get tangled up over something small like this. So I think it's a good document. It's not absolutely non-bulletproof. I think it's got everything in there that I think that's important.
I'm just trying to get an understanding of.
Yeah.
Where is the flexibility built into
Sure.
it? Where is the burden of proof? And if
Right.
the burden of proof is not possible, then do we need to add more flexibility?
yeah, I guess I think the burden of proof I was referring to mostly, I think more to the building code and to the maybe, the EV chargers, that's state model code. Maybe there's some flexibility in that. These are all good questions that if you wanted to reopen the hearing and continue the meeting to the next meeting and have more discussion on those particular things, we certainly can do that as well.
But
Sure.
please, last meeting, you mentioned how critical it was to finish the process up tonight and keep things moving vis-a-vis the grant. So if we delayed for 3 weeks or next meeting, whatever it is, how's it impact what you guys need to do?
Well,
is it even doable?
Isn't
Well,
there
I also
money
said,
involved?
yes, but I also said that I wasn't gonna make the planning commission forced into a decision based on a grant deadline. The fact that this is down to the last minute is not your obligation to necessarily approve it.
You said you need to show that we're moving along the process in order to satisfy the grant.
Then we had a public hearing tonight, so if you choose to open it and continue it, I don't see there's any harm in that. I would prefer that not be the case, but I also don't see the harm in it. And I'm not worried about the grant deadline as much as I am continuing to get a good process.
Some of the things that Paul said, I think have merit and can be changed quite easily in the code. In what you're proposing. Also, I have some questions I'd like to ask developers regarding setbacks and also putting green landscape in. I've got some questions regarding the fences along the greenway. And I'm just looking at split rail fencing. It's like cow fencing that anyone can just quickly jump over. And if I'm a developer on the greenway, I'm going to develop a property down there. Safety is my number one factor, more than aesthetics. I have some serious questions. And I hate to delay things. And I won't delay it or ask to delay it if it's absolutely critical that we don't delay it.
Yes, we have a deadline on the grant, but at the end of the day, there is nothing in the grant deadline that requires that that obligates you to make this decision. The amount of time that you've had to review this since the draft was ready has been very minimal. So I don't expect that you could make a decision tonight. I'm hopeful, but I don't expect it.
The fencing thing came in on Friday, I think. Right? But the changes came on Friday.
Yes, we tried. Well, some of the changes came in on Friday and then, but those were based upon comments that we tried to incorporate from Mr. K. So we tried to get out ahead of this. So I think we're definitely showing that we're making strides to get this done sooner rather than later. But you are not obligated if you have questions that are unanswered to adopt a code that you're not comfortable with.
I feel like we've had, I personally feel like there's been a lot of time on this project. I feel like there's been so many opportunities for public input and for us to learn about it. Part of me hates to hold it up because it has been doing so great. On the flip side, I also recognize the point of a public hearing is that you get input from the public. And if we aren't in a position to be able to respond to that, then I feel a little conflicted on that piece too. I didn't know if there was a way of kind of marrying the two of those where we can maybe go ahead and approve what we've got, but ask the staff to work with to look into these issues in the language. And I leave it to you because maybe this isn't a good suggestion, but you would be coming back to us with amendments. But we would at least be moving the project forward and then being able to kind of address these types of issues or perhaps any Commissioner Lutz's issues while still getting the bulk of the work across the finish line and then just tying up those few loose ends. Is
Yeah, I
that
think,
messy or is that a clean process?
well, I think the best way to do it is to, again, go back to open the hearing.
Mhm.
And then direct staff to get Paul's comments. Sounded like they were written to, so I can probably get them from him. And then provide a response to the commission based on what can be changed and what cannot be changed in staff's opinion at the next meeting. And then you can choose, maybe there might be some draft language that incorporates those particular changes. So that you can adopt that at the next meeting. And that's fine. I mean, we do have a city council meeting scheduled for the 10th of May. But I can open that hearing there and continue it to a date time specific. Again, not obligating ourselves, just trying to make sure that we're noticing and trying to do this as quickly as we can. But the best, cleanest way for you to do would be to make a motion to reopen the hearing. And direct staff to bring back suggestions for Paul K's comments.
I think that's the latest option too. I feel like we're getting to, it's already hard enough to remember what happened in February. And we're still amending and trying to figure out the February minutes. So I mean, I get the importance of all those things, but I would recommend that we keep this as a package. And it sounds like as long as you can demonstrate progress, us being here is progress, we can still move on this pretty quickly.
Yes.
I'd like to limit our deliberation to the new things so that are brought on, so we don't re-deliberate things that we have already gone.
Yeah, you
over.
can't deliberate, so you can't deliberate now. So what we would do is you would open the public hearing, direct staff to address these comments at the next meeting and bring back some recommended changes. And that's it, because you can't deliberate.
I think I like that because I don't want us to have to go back over everything we've
Yeah.
done today.
No, and I think we're close.
Yeah.
We're really close. So why wait till the next meeting? And I hate to say this, but why not have a meeting in between? Keep the process going, say 2 weeks from now, and then you can still move forward with the council and still move things at the same speed that you wanted to.
But we still will have another meeting in 2 weeks. I think that's the next scheduled meeting, is May 12th.
12.
So that's right. So I'm going away, coming back the day before, as I remember that. So why don't we do that and and talk about what we're talking about tonight and the changes on the 12th. And then you can move forward to the city council at your preferred time frame.
Right. So I think that's what we would do is I would take Paul's comments, come back with some recommendations, take what you've asked questions about on the, the fencing in the greenway and, some setbacks, things of that nature, and bring those back as well.
Was the fencing question changed, recommended by Paul also?
I believe that's where it came from.
Thank you.
But I will say that one's pretty consistent with the floodplain ordinance. You can't have chain link fence. You have to have collapsible fences. So, there's not a lot of options.
We're gonna have to have an extension of time. It's 9 o'clock.
Yeah, so you'll need a motion.
So I need a motion to extend the meeting. How long is this gonna take, folks? 15 minutes, half hour?
I feel like we're ready. I'm not sure the procedural things that are required, but I feel like we kind of made a decision about how to proceed. Do we just need to do it?
You can finish this topic, direct staff, and then just adjourn the meeting because the meeting's over.
Okay, all right.
So we would just need a motion to open the public hearing, reopen the public hearing to May 12th.
I
That way I
would
don't
make a
have to
motion
renotice
to
it.
reopen the public hearing on May 12th and ask staff to please address Paul K's issues
Yeah.
and bring those back to us.
And all the others, yeah, fencing.
Then a motion.
That's a motion.
I'll second.
But it was a motion.
We have a motion. We have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Okay, Commissioner McFadden,
Yes.
Commissioner Luz,
Yes.
Commissioner Adams. We'll come back to that one. Commissioner Monso?
Yes.
Okay, great. Got two yeses. Commissioner Hanson absent, Commissioner Norpshin,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrich,
Yes.
motion passes.
There's no.
All right.
Right. So now you have to adjourn the meeting because there can't be any other thing to go on after that, unless you make a motion to attend it.
Now.
The only other thing, Commissioner comments, and I think we've all talked a lot.
Basically meeting adjourned, so there's no more.
Motion
No-
to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right.
Thank you.